Aaron Daniels from the Healthy Creative podcast shares his passion for creativity with you. If you're looking for interesting creative and design conversations, or just simple and effective ways to get more creativity into your life, then this show is for you. Aaron and his guests deliver simple, effective advice that promotes inclusion into creativity rather than unnecessary exclusion. Creativity isn't just for creative types. The result? A sharper, smarter, more creative you. Now it's time to join your host Aaron Daniels for the Healthy Creative podcast.
Hello friends, welcome to the latest episode of the Healthy Creative podcast, brought to you by healthycreative.co.uk. I'm Aaron Daniels. I've worked in London's world-class creative industry for a number of years now. I work within design and art direction, but I've got a serious appetite for all things creative. Now when we go to a live event, be it a festival or a sports event, we all see and enjoy these incredible LED screens and beautiful projected animations onto the side of huge buildings. But how is it all done? That's the big question. And that's what we're going to be finding out today with my guest Kate Dawkins. Now Kate has made her name with a career that spans over 20 years. She's worked on some incredible projects, creative projects that don't come around every day. From the London 2012 opening and closing ceremonies, to shows for Elton John in Vegas, to Fast and Furious Live, to the multi-award-winning Passchendaele Centenary for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. I'm excited, listeners. Let's dive in.
I am Kate Dawkins, founder and creative director of Kate Dawkins Studio, predominantly a designer and director, and as a studio we create bespoke design-led digital content for live shows, brand events and visual performances. We're a small agency and we've been going for 3 years, working mainly in the field of LED and projection mapping. So at the beginning.
You work on some amazing creative projects these days, but I want you to cast your mind back to maybe some more formative years. What's your background and how did you get into the type of projects you're making today?
Well, my background, I studied graphic design at Newport College of Higher Education, which I think is now part of Cardiff University. I then felt that I hadn't sort of finished learning or experimenting and was very lucky to go on and do a master's at Central St Martin's. They're both in sort of graphic design or what was then visual communication, went on to be visual communication. I always wanted to be a graphic designer. My father was a designer, so I was sort of grown up with all that sort of language, I suppose, around me. And sadly, I'd like to have said I wanted to be an astronaut or, a doctor or something, but sadly I always wanted to be a graphic designer. And the luxury of college, or certainly the luxury of college then was having this time to experiment, which we don't get in the real world when schedules and budgets are chasing you around. But and it was great. And as I said, it's sort of funny. I was looking at some work the other day, and although it was stills, it looked very sequential.
Was it your old college?
Yes, yeah. And it was. I used to design typefaces, and as I said, I had a digital camera, and I'd sort of use the camera to make these sort of movies of these typefaces and sort of layer it all back up again. But yeah, I was looking at this work and it sort of, it looks like a storyboard. So it was weird. So perhaps, who knows? It was always there. When I came out of college, St Martin's, I was very lucky to get a job at a company called Intro, which was doing some really exciting work at the time. So it was a design company but had a moving image department. And I think because I'd started when I was doing my master's playing around with a digital camera, and I think, computers were very new. I mean, we're talking back in the sort of early 90s. And, started playing around with that and sort of doing some moving image. So I think when I went to Intro, they sort of saw that I could, design a sort of more traditionally graphic design, but that I could also do this sort of moving image. And as I say, the department was I think quite small at the time, so they sort of went, great, we'll have her. And so I went on and I did a lot of I was there for 13 years, and I designed and directed lots of commercials and title sequences and more broadcast work.
Do you have an overarching creative approach to the types of projects you work now? Something that connects them all?
I don't. I mean, I have never lost the fact of being a graphic designer. All the work, which is different because there's lots of people who do the kind of work we do now, and a lot of people come from a sort of post-production angle or filmmaking or things like that. But I think because I'm a designer, I think that's the one thing that will always hold all the work together, because it's the first point of the work. We lots of people have different processes. My process and our process as the studio is to lock down the design, how it's going to look and feel, and that, and then we move into animation. We don't do any work until the design's been signed off.
So are there any particular artists or influencers that you're inspired by and that falls into your work, or you always kind of reference?
Well, I think I'm probably going to say the typical sort of Saul Bass, I suppose, because that's the sort of two connections. But I artists such as Carl Gerstner, I love his work. I think, and Sol Lewitt. I think there's something about that sort of geometric nature of their work. I love geometry. I was terrible at maths, so I don't know where this is coming from. But
from purely a visual perspective.
Totally. Totally love a sort of geometric pattern and something. I think I've got a touch of Wes Anderson's symmetry to everything I do as well. But yeah, I mean, both of those artists' work are incredible, and I think you sort of hold that sort of work dear to your heart and remember it as you're going forward. There's nothing contemporary that I'm sort of blown away at the moment, but who knows? Who knows?
Excellent. Time to find out a bit more about some projects you've worked on. Now, listeners, with this first project, we're going to explore the adrenaline-fueled thrills of the franchise built on speed. Kate Dawkins and her team were responsible for the creative direction behind the Fast and Furious Live World Tour, which hit the roads at the beginning of 2018 with a packed house at the O2 Arena. Now, I'm a passionate creative, but I'm also a petrol head with the love for death-defying stunts. So this one caught my eye. Did you know I've actually had lessons in stunt driving? Many strings. I've perfected the classic handbrake turn between two cars.
Wow.
So watch out, Vin Diesel.
Wow, exactly. I don't think he does the driving. Just little spoiler there.
So do you want to describe the creative journey from the initial conversation to the brief?
Well, I got contacted by the show's creative director, a gentleman called Roland French. He was the I don't know if he was, I think perhaps he was still the creative director of Top Gear and then Top Gear Live at the time. And it was his vision to produce this show. So just sort of wrapping it up and what it's actually about. It was Universal Studios licensed the show, the use for the show to turn it into a live show. And so he sort of intimated at this show. I mean, I like you. I'm a petrol head. I've got a motorbike license. I like cars, and so I was like, this is great. This is a great project. And but he didn't tell me very much. He sort of told me about it, and then he arranged for us all to sort of meet. So everybody from each of the disciplines. So obviously we were there doing the projection content, lighting, sound, stunt drive, the whole gamut. That's what these shows are all about. There's so many people involved, and it's such a wonderful collection. And we sat in a sort of meeting room in a hotel, and he talked through the show, and I think at the end of it, everybody was just staring at him, going, "What? What? You're mad!" But I mean, he was an incredible guy to work with because his visions were huge, and we just sort of went on the ride with him. So that was a couple of years it took to sort of discuss that, and then obviously get the usual sort of I suppose nonsense of budgets and things like that, all the usual sort of
the
thing.
B word.
Yeah, I'm being creative. I hate talking about money. Rubbish. So, we sort of talked about that, and then I sort of worked out how we were going to best approach it, because our studio is very small. It was a very long production. Plus, we had other big productions on, which we're going to go on to talk about at the same time. So I've got a sort of joint venture with another small production agency called Dandelion and Burdock, and they do some lovely work. They do tend to, I mean, they'll probably say they don't, but I mean, in this case, they're a bit more sort of 3D than we are, I suppose. Our work's a bit, as you say, sort of a bit more grounded in graphic design. So they came on board to sort of produce all the work with me as the creative director. And it worked really well. It was a great team. They worked very hard. Me pushing my vision and Roland pushing his vision onto me, and but it was a long process. It was a year-long sort of ride, so to speak. Excuse the pun. Lots of rehearsals. We spent a long time in rehearsals. I think we spent about 3 weeks in Birmingham, another week in Liverpool before we hit the O2. And just complex. I mean, every project we do has such a challenging aspect to them. You could never guess what it's going to be either. They all throw up different things. You think it's going to be one thing, it's something completely different. And in this respect, I mean, Fast and Furious is a live arena tour that reenacts the stunts from the films in front of a live audience. I mean, that's as simple as that. You know, we took some of the best stunts from the films. But what they did is they sort of had obviously arena floor, which was projection, and a back wall, which was projection. And in that back wall was 5 doors that opened different heights to allow props and vehicles to come in. So, you know, what we would have on the back wall in our digital world would be this sort of, you know, lorry barreling down a road in Las Vegas or wherever, outside Las Vegas. And, you know, you'd see this lorry and then the door would open, the lorry would have to come out for real to match the two things. And I think that was one of our biggest challenges, was this alignment of the digital to the real. So, yeah, that was very complex. But what we were creating is we were creating the sort of landscapes that all these stunts took place in. So we'd go from, as I say, the desert
from
to
Tokyo
Russia.
to Miami,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
From Tokyo to Miami.
Really beautiful.
The Tokyo scene was beautiful. Tokyo car park from Tokyo Drift was fantastic. So, and, you know, amazing driving. Those drivers were incredible. They came from some very high-profile backgrounds, and just great. Amazing project to work on.
Would you say that sort of the key technical challenges were around the connection of the vehicles coming out in the scene and what was happening?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it wasn't even just as I said, the sort of things coming out from the screen. We had one thing where from Fast and Furious 8. Where the submarine in the film, sort of, we had a submarine, amazing submarine. The set pieces were stunning, and so we see the submarine smashing through the ice in our world, and then the door opens and the submarine comes out. And normally, to a point in most of the scenes, that's where we would sort of stop our world or keep it move gently, because we couldn't really have the floor moving and everything else moving, because otherwise people would just be sick. But in this instance, the submarine had to crack the ice on the floor as it went through. And there was many conversations about whether we could do this with real-time software. And I don't think we sort of, I wouldn't say trusted it, but it was a lot to do if it didn't work on an already, quite tight budget. So there were the most ridiculous things. The poor driver had about sort of 15 mirrors inside so they could see where it goes. But it was the whole timing thing. It's like we had to keep the cracking going. And so I think in the end it did look great, but there was a certain layer of probably smoke that helped. So it just helped. They can't quite
smoke
see that. Yeah, literally. But no, it was good. But yes, definitely the biggest technical challenge. Yeah.
And in terms of tracking the cars that drove around, how did that technically work? Was that something you worked with?
It wasn't. That wasn't really part of our aspect. Although in some respects, it's, as I say, everything is connected to a point. It's using BlackTrack's system. It's a tracking system. So each of the cars had sensors on them. So I think I would say there was probably 6, sort of 4 and 1 in the centre. And what that meant was that was the lighting knew where the cars were at any one time. We were able to they would be able to follow that. The actors had them on, so again, the follow spots could work with them. So it was very much for the positioning. We did do a few things, because we did use Notch, which is a real-time generative piece of software to do some bit. So obviously the two things connect. Obviously they read information from one another. So yeah, there was a little bit of that, but we knew where the cars were at all times.
And in terms of the storyline, how much input do you have to influence the story through your visuals? Is it something that is defined? None.
No, it wasn't. That's not fair. To say, I think when we first started it, when I as I've said earlier, my work is very, very design based, and I started looking at influences of gaming, where you get that sort of lovely graphic approach.
Yeah, it totally comes across.
Yeah, and so we sort of looked at that, and then there were the sort of certain aspects of gaming. I started looking at illustrators first, and I think some of my ideas were very sort of graphic and thing, and then we were sort of looking at gaming, but it was a little bit more graphic, and then obviously games like Halo, they were a bit more sort of beautiful and real. And I think it was something we had to be very careful of. at the very beginning, and that whole sort of sense of, client expectation is just making sure that they understood that, this was not going to look like the films. We couldn't, we don't have the budgets because it's a live show. It deserves to have its own identity. Absolutely. So, but I very quickly realised that the sort of graphic illustrative approach was not going to fly at all. We met with a big meeting with Universal, and I could see that it was like, I can see this needs to be the language of the film. So we looked at the films. We knew a lot of stunts. So it was very much about taking the identifiers from those sections and sort of building them into ours. But it did retain that slightly sort of stylised look. So I'm very pleased with that. Excellent. That was a bit we were very happy about.
I think it's anything like set the visual rules at the beginning.
Yes,
and then
exactly.
People believe.
Absolutely. And as I say, it was very important at the very beginning to make sure that everybody understood what it was going to look like. The last thing you need on shows like this is a nasty shock at the end when someone goes, "Is that it?"
Yes.
So
yes, it is.
Sorry, but so that's great show to work on.
And also, just in terms of, it was a travelling show. It went from London and also knows in Sheffield as well. Did you have to set it up differently, or did you always have very defined?
Yeah, no.
This is it. This is it.
No, once it's rehearsed and locked down in the system, the system is locked, so to speak, and it just plays. Yeah. The operator was with it because obviously anything could happen in the show. They might even have to stop the show, so they would have to stop it. But with regards to changing anything, nothing needed changing. And
as well in this scenario, the nature of the design layout meant that different members of the audience had different viewing angles.
Yeah, yes.
So I just wondered how that was thought about. What were the challenges behind? As a viewer, there's an optimum angle, but what's my storytelling from the different sides?
It was really, really hard because we had this vanishing point because it was all realistic. Angles. There was a vanishing point. They were roads. They wanted a vanishing point. So we did go around and round and round and round in circles a lot with that one, and just again try to make sure that everybody was very aware that we couldn't solve the problem. That I cannot bend physics. There are things I can do. I cannot bend physics. So it is. So we, it came down to the fact that there was always going to need to be an optimum. There was going to be a sweet spot. We also did a lot of things. The client at one point wanted the sort of floor to fall away. The things they do in the sort of ice hockey things in the States, which are very, very trendy over there at the moment. But a lot of those are shot from one angle. And so we did a lot of work to show what it looks amazing from this side, but if you're sat the other side, it's going to look like this. So there was a lot of, I suppose, education and not wanting to sort of sound like, sort of teaching a granny to suck eggs, but just educating people as to what this was going to look like. And I think at in the final show, yes, I'm not going to lie, we were sat straight onto it. It was amazing, but I think it was so exciting. There was so much going on that you suspended belief. You still went, that's a road going into the distance. Yeah. So it was nowhere near as bad as we all sort of started fretting about at the beginning of the production.
The next project we're going to look at is the multi-award-winning project created for the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. It was watched by approximately 8,000 guests and broadcast live by the BBC to an audience which peaked at 1.5 million. To mark the centenary of Passchendaele, Third Battle of Ypres, during the First World War, Kate and her team looked at the design, animation and delivery of all the projection content. Do you want to describe the journey?
Yeah, it's a crazy journey. We were working on this project alongside Fast and Furious. So if ever there was sort of two such opposing projects, it was these two. I was out of the country when we got a phone call. We work with a technology company. They are not just providers of hardware, but they're complete specialists in supplying and assisting in these projects. And we've worked with them a lot over the years when I was a freelancer in certain agencies and also as our own company. And they called and said, we've got this pitch, but obviously we can pitch on it, but they want content and we don't do content. We can obviously give them a budget for the technical side of it. Would you come on board? And as a rule, we don't really pitch. We're too small a company, and fortunately, we sort of don't need to. We're lucky in that respect. So, I sort of, as I said, I was on holiday, so I was like, well, what is it? And tell me about it. So they sort of summed up, and I said, oh, that sounds really interesting, but I can't do anything. I'm on holiday. I'm going to get divorced if I even attempt to even do this. Although when I put the phone down, my husband did say, you can do some work if you want. I was like, no, I'm on holiday.
The infamous question.
Like,
up to you.
This is a test. So, I said, I can't do anything, but if you can hold them back until we get back. So, as I say, as it was when we came back, we didn't have any work on because I'd sort of closed everything down in order to go away. So I said, right, we'll do it. And I was told what it was about. It was a centenary event for Passchendaele, the Third Battle of Ypres, and I didn't know anything about this battle. Subsequently, I know a lot, and I know how horrendous it actually was. Terrible loss of life, as it was across the whole of World War One. But this was particularly devastating conditions. But it just sounded such a beautiful project and so sort of worthy. And so I sort of threw myself into the Imperial War Museum and put together some designs and we went into our pitch battle and subsequently won it. And so we set about again, the usual discussions about budgets. And
What should be called?
God. So this was in August. I think we'd pretty much got the job signed off just before Christmas, which was a wonderful Christmas present. And we started on it in January. Same thing as I say, we started off doing design, started researching the battle. It was all the sort of script of the show had been structured by the BBC. They were going to be broadcasting. It was their show in that respect. The event was being put on by the DCMS, but it was very much being handled by the wonderful guys at the BBC. And so we sort of set about designing that. Went through lots and lots of meetings, got that approved, went into production. I talk about this project a lot, and I think one of the things that was really important for us was the delicate nature of handling the materials we had and maintaining the sense of authenticity. Mm-hmm. So making sure all the pictures were correct. They were the actual people. Mm-hmm. We were very lucky to chase down sort of, pictures of their families. Any of the sort of letters were the real letters. Mm-hmm. We had a wonderful sort of the archive for the Imperial War Museum.
That was all the Imperial War Museum archive.
Yeah,
wow.
Amazing.
Right.
So that was so exciting and so moving in that respect. But it was just, I'd never done a building projection before. I don't think the client knew that when they gave us the job. But I'd never done one before, and it was so huge. It was 125 metres wide.
Does that kind of thing scare you when you look at that as a canvas? Because it's it's sort of thing like, wow, I've got to feel that.
I have to say, we did a recce. We all went out there, and it was freezing. It was absolutely freezing, and I think it really hit home when I was standing in front of the building, because our building was Cloth Hall, which is in the marketplace in Ypres, and again, I'm not saying that there's projection mapping and people just choose any old building, because they don't, but in this, the significance of this building being at the Market Square, and it was so destroyed during the war, that, the Menin Gate is just off from it, and it's where the troops sort of marched through, a lot of them never to return. So it was a staggeringly amazing but terrifying and daunting experience looking at the building. But I keep saying, I think I just scaled things up from I just made things giant. So it was that's what we did. We just put giant things on a giant building.
And in terms of the storytelling, were there any kind of key theatrical moments, or did you use the building to its advantage creatively?
Well, yes, I think so. I mean, we tried to approach each section, because there were so many different things. There was points. I mean, there were 3 things that the building did. It would have its own standalone moments where really it was all about the building projection. And then it would there was a sort of halfway house where it was a backdrop to a performance, whether that be music or a read or something like that. And then there was things like Warhorse, and Wipers Times, where they were proper performances, where really it was just acting as a you couldn't turn it off, it wouldn't disappear. So we had to put something on it that would hold it all together. So it had that sort of sliding scale of importance, but there were points of narrative storytelling. We had to explain the Battle of Ypres on it, which was difficult. But there was moments. I mean, I think that the moment where the architecture really sort of played its point was when we, and it was that section actually, we put the soldiers in the windows, and it was to sort of highlight the sort of how many soldiers had died during this battle, and it was it was an incredibly powerful moment. It was very arresting.
Can you talk a bit more about the Warhorse collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, that was with the National Theatre. I mean, we didn't have a huge amount of involvement because obviously the BBC were directing it all, but Michael Morpurgo wrote a specific piece for this. Obviously Joey Morse was with us, and it was beautiful. It was such a beautiful moment. I mean, I decided that this needed to be something very special and something very individual. Well, all the pieces needed to be individual. I mean, the one thing that was very important about this event is that it communicated a horrific battle to a much more contemporary audience. It wasn't about selling a battle back to the descendants of the people who'd been, it wasn't it's not a remembrance service. It was a commemoration, and it needed to be contemporary and forward sort of thinking. So, and also, I know the company who do the visuals for War, so I was there's no way I was going to go near sort of creating a sort of pastiche of what they'd already done. So I sort of said, look, we all touch on it, but we want to bring our own sort of flavour to this for this thing. So one of the team that I've worked with him for years since the days of Intro is very much an illustrator, so he and an animator, so more traditional animator. So he created all these beautiful scenes for Warhorse. So it was stunning. Galloping horses across the building, and it was very beautiful.
You mentioned earlier about the use of original content, which is interesting for this case here. I just wondered a bit more about the bigger question: is like what makes compelling content?
Well, I think it's intriguing. It's beautiful. It needs to look beautiful. I think if the situation is, it needs to look beautiful. I always sort of say that you should be able to stop an animation on any frame, and the composition of it is beautiful. But it is, you're right, it's about storytelling, it's about context, it's about appropriateness for what you're saying. So all of those things sort of should come together to actually make it, that hopefully that combination of ingredients will give you a sort of compelling, piece of content.
And the final project, I think a lot of our listeners would certainly know, was the London 2012 Olympic opening and closing ceremonies. As I was researching this, I was looking back at the opening ceremony on YouTube, and it just made me smile watching this. It was really good. Some of the music and the mix of Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams, and they dropped Prodigy and Firestarter. Yes. Actually gave me goosebumps.
Yeah, incredible.
There's a lot going on in that event, but specifically, Kate, you were working on the giant 360 audience pixels. These are the pixels that were in the audience stadium. So do you want to talk to us about how that worked and what was the creative story behind all that?
Yeah, well, my sort of story, I was freelancing at the time, and I've been working with a creative director on and off for quite a few years, and I got a phone call one day, and it was from him, and he said, how would you like to work on the biggest show on earth? And
simple sentence.
Yeah, I know. He didn't even say hello, I don't think, which is even more funny. And or perhaps I just wanted him not to have said hello. Sounds a better story. And I said, is it the Olympics? And he said, oh, I can't tell you that. And I said, don't be silly. You left to go and work on the Olympics. Of course it's the Olympics. He went, I can't tell you that. And I said, well, if it is, yes. So as I say, I was freelancing at the time. So I was brought on board as the sort of senior art director, creative lead, really, for both. I ended up doing both the opening and closing ceremony at the same time, which was A lot to do. Perhaps some would say a little mad to have taken on the two of them, but
got to be a little bit mad.
Yeah, you've got to be a little mad to do this, exactly. And so just to sort of go back to what you were saying, the audience pixels were 9 high bright LED sort of paddles, I think we always sort of referred to them as, that were attached to, I think, just around about 75,000 of the seats in the arena. The idea was, the brainchild of Danny Boyle. It was something that he very much wanted, and it was to create a sense of inclusiveness, to extend the action on the field of play, which is the base of the arena, the field of play, up into the audience, and that very much worked. It was a credible experience that starts with the question of, how the hell do we do this?
It's a 4-hour long.
Yeah, well, it was it was quite long, and I think in the opening ceremony, of course, there was so much going on the field of play that the pixels, a lot of the time, were acting as a backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
They were there, but perhaps not always sort of prominent. Whereas in the closing ceremony, it was about music and the sort of history of British music, and they totally came into their own. You aren't just talking about a bowl of an arena. There was 2 tiers that were set at completely different angles, and we spent so much time even sort of working out how to make a circle look like a circle, because if you put a circle on it, it didn't look like a circle. It went completely crazy. So there was things like that just, so much work that we just had to try and ended up being thrown away.
How do you test and simulate these kind of things?
Well, this is it. It's funny. I was talking about this because just going back to Passchendaele very briefly, we used software, pre-visualization software and virtual reality to be able to see the content on the building, and it just goes to show how much has changed in what sort of 5 years, because we had the media server we were using for the Olympics had a sort of pre-visualization sort of ability to it, but it's quite basic. We were still able to create it, but it was the only thing we had that would show us what it was going to look like, because it was such a long, thin strip. It was so difficult to design on it, because everybody thinks, it must have been huge, and it wasn't, because they were so far apart. The LEDs, the actual canvas was very small. So the designing was difficult, showing client how it was going to look was really difficult. So all of that was really, and there's something that's really come to the forefront now is that ability. But it was really complex. But once we sort of started finding out what worked, we were sort of up and running, and we could sort of go through with it. But you look back now and just sort of think, well, that didn't work as well as well as it could. But you just leave it out of the show reel. Yes, yeah. We can definitely find 2 minutes of stuff in this. But
that's one of the questions I had was with the fact that, unlike the projections in previous cases we spoke about, they were pixels, weren't they? So it wasn't like you could generate the rich information that you'd see on projection mapping projects or on the Fast and Furious projects. So how did you think about that creatively?
Well, we work with LED. I mean, that's our main sort of core work. Is we create large scale content for either using with LED or with projection mapping. You're absolutely right. They're 2 very different sort of things. You can get really, really, beautiful clarity with projection mapping because you've got all the information there. But of course, if your projectors aren't strong enough, then your picture isn't very strong. LEDs are incredible because they're light emitting. They're bright. They're wonderful, they're vibrant, they're rich, again, but if your pixel pitch, which is the distance between each of the pixels, is huge, as it was in the Olympics, your need is to be much further back, and I think we were always very surprised and amazing how, they knew to put that many pixels or that many pixels would give them.
Do the job.
Do the job. Because I know previously, I think in Doha, they'd used 1 pixel, but that was just obviously creating a colour. We were, for the first time, being able to put content onto something and see it as content. If you put a face on it, you saw it. But it does go to show, if you sort of watch it back, how amazing the helicopter shots are, because that's as far back as you get. And so it's about that sort of visual acuity, is how close you need to be away from something to be able to view it properly.
How was it working with Danny Boyle? Was it an interesting experience?
I was going to say it was. We only met him once or twice. We were just sort of, again, like I said very back at the beginning, we're such a part. These things always are some of the parts, and we're just a part. So you sort of just go with it. You sort of go, what's happening? What's going to be happening at the moment? What's exactly as you say. What's the music? Music was incredible. I mean, as I said, I did a talk last week, and someone said to me afterwards, because normally they sort of say, "Oh, we watch you showing Passchendaele, and it makes me cry." And this one woman said to me, I know, I was nearly in tears. And I said, yeah, I know, Passchendaele's really, really hard. And she said, no, it was the Olympics.
Passchendaele, fine.
Yeah, I don't know, I was fine with that. Fine with the people dying. But, it is, as you say, it's that emotional sort of strength in all the aspects. And the music was very strong.
So with projection mapping, the concept of taking something which is flat in terms of animation and adding it to a real 3D object, what are the challenges behind this, and how do you have to begin to think?
Well, it's different. You sort of have to have a sense of being able to see in 3D. That might sound weird, but you have to understand your canvas. I mean, all our animations are flat. They have to be. I was saying again when I was talking about it that we get this sort of I like to call it like a dressmaker's pattern. It is very much like that. A dress is going to be made, and formed from its parts. But when you get the pattern and open it up, it's just a flat mass of pieces, and that's what we're given. We're given this flat mass of pieces, and we put our animations into them, and then in the system it gets wrapped back around its 3D structure. But I think predominantly as a sort of designer, you need to be able to look at that building and sort of know what you can use and play with. I think that's the thing. But you've got to understand it as a 3D space because it isn't flat. It's that's very much a difference.
And did you say that you had the ability to test in VR before seeing things full scale?
Yeah. Yeah, it was an incredible experience. I'm not a huge fan of VR. I think VR is incredible, but because we're very much about live events with lots of people, I think the sort of insular thing of VR is very opposing. But the Previs software that we were using, which was developed by a friend of mine, it was incredible. But you're still looking at a 27-inch iMac. Yeah. You can't get in to see, what does it look like?
What do I look like? What does it look like when I stand over here?
Yeah, exactly.
What's it look like when I stand
but not
over
even
there?
that, the detail, because you're still looking at it. So I think that was the edge that the sort of VR gave us, because I was lliterally standing at the base of the building. And it was very clunky, it was very blocked, and the trees were pyramids. But I was able to sort of go, it was, a lot of these projects that we do, particularly places in public places and outside, we've got no rehearsal time. We've got no time to get there and find that something is really wrong. So to be able to see a certain amount of mistakes or a certain amount of things that aren't working or aren't aligning before you go was vital. I mean, it was so helpful.
The audience are more often than not a really important part of your project. So what's your approach to them? How do you think about the audience, and kind of what crosses your mind about them?
The audience of everything. I was saying I always refer to the audience as the final link in the chain that completes the whole cycle of life of a project, because we sit there and if you think about it, we start off and the vision's just mine and and another creative director in our team and things like that, and we're sort of sitting there and you're sort of working you're working in isolation, and you think you're doing hopefully a good job, and all this is happening, and then you start working on it and you start usual thing, you sort of question whether you're doing the right thing, and all this is all sort of insular sort of thinking and about it, and then even to a point after a while you sort of think I'm sick of looking at this. I've been looking at this for a long time and I sort of can't see it anymore, can't see the wood for the trees, and also even more so when you go and do a rehearsal, because a rehearsal's normally it's running, so you're now seeing it in its final destination, but you've got people banging and putting up things and people more chatting.
Keep it down, please.
Yeah,
exactly.
Test
my animation
you've probably got
projection.
probably got to stand in, someone's just standing in for you, and all of that sort of thing. So you're still going, oh God, is this right? Is this going to work? And then you come to show night or event day or whatever it is, and then suddenly this audience comes in and they stand there and it's just It just changes it.
It's the first time they've seen it, but the millionth time you've seen it.
Yeah. And, being able to watch it through their eyes and seeing, hopefully seeing the sort of surprise and delight, and, it's just magical. As I say, it is the final link.
So I want to get inside your head a bit more for our listeners. What is it that motivates you creatively? Why do you make what you do? Where do you get your creative kicks?
Oh, I've got to the point where I've now sort of I think that perhaps I can't do anything else. I'm so happy. I can't tell you how happy I am when I'm.
I can see you smiling right now.
I know. It is like everything. There's not a great deal going on in my life. I have an amazing husband who puts up with my nonsense, and I think it's just. I just there is something so magical about not struggling, but you sit there and you think, what am I going to do with this? And, I look around at inspiration. I don't it doesn't come from nowhere. I look at artists and, whatever, just to sort of think, oh, with that, perhaps that'll work, Always look at sort of mood imagery and references and things like that, and just go, yeah, that. And then you sort of get that sort of, I don't know, that sort of tingling feeling where you go, hang on, I think I might have got this. And and you start sort of scribbling down ideas, and you're like, yeah, and you get more and more sort of worked up by this sort of ridiculous realisation that you might come up with a solution. But I mean, also it's crazy, the old saying of like, we're not saving lives. We aren't saving lives. There's some incredible people out there who save lives. We are just, entertaining people, but nonetheless, I think the passion and dedication is possibly there still.
For me, I know that when I sit at a computer screen, the creative solution is already there, and the computer is just the tool to realise that. So it doesn't come up with the ideas for me. I guess my question is, when are you creatively at your best?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's those things. Computers are amazing. They've allowed us to work fast, work with energy, and also the software out there is incredible. But it is a means to bring your idea to life, and not the other way round. I mean, I can't draw. My drawing's terrible, but I could draw enough to express what I'm trying to do. So I do scribble a lot, but I think I love to read. I like to see things. I like to walk. I like to think. I think all of those points are, when you're creative. I think, even lying in bed this morning, I was like, oh, what if I did that for that?
Yeah, exactly. It's never off.
It's never off. And that's fine. That's fine. I think when you go on holiday, you perhaps have to keep some clients at bay. But your creativity can never go on holiday. It's as simple as that. But no, absolutely. I think there's sort of moments, everywhere. And I think it's just sort of going back to what you were saying about the computer. Even this morning, I was writing a poem out in rubber stamps. So I think I went into we have two studios. I went to the next studio and said, "Whose stupid idea was this?" And then someone turned around and went, "I think it's yours." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that was really stupid."
So what's one myth you would want to dispel for someone who wants to get more creative in their lifestyle and they're just a bit afraid?
I think everybody's creative. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not. People have always got a sort of creativity in them. Yeah, I think the myth is definitely that only certain people are creative, because that's nonsense. I think if you've got a love and passion to want to try something, then try it. Because the worst that can happen is you don't like it. You can try something else.
So creativity is about failure as well as success. So what's the worst piece of work that you've ever made? Something that you're ashamed of and you thought it was great at the time? We all make those ones.
I think they're so funny. We do, yes, my God. No one could possibly sit here and tell you that they don't. That's the thing. I mean, I think the quote was Peter Gabriel quote, "The ability comes from learning to fail." I think there was that sort of whole thing. And I think, failure is a good thing, I think, because it makes you learn. But, I mean, there are always things you wish you'd done better. But I think there is a particular, if I can go back to my student days, that I made this film I think it was for my master's, and I found it a couple of years ago when I was talking at D&AD, and I said I found this film and I had it digitised, and in my head I remember this film. I was like, oh, this film's great. I made this film's great. And I watched it, and I thought, what is that? And not only that, it was such a... It was a show I showed everybody. The talk. I was going to totally show them. I was like, I can't even believe how awful this is. But it was just a sort of load of sort of highbrow nonsense. That was what shocked me more than anything. I was like, who do I think I am? Is this like some kind of like artistic statements that I'm making? It's like, so that was pretty bad. But I mean, I think fortunately we've been very, very lucky that in the professional sense, the work has always been at a high level. As I said, I think some things work better than others, but I think without trying them, you won't. You have to try these things and hope that they work.
The next question I have is about the transition to Kate Dawkins' studio. I remember when we had a conversation, and you mentioned in terms of doing your own thing, the only thing you mentioned was that you wish you hadn't started it sooner. So obviously it's going well. I just wonder, what do you think stopped you, as a lot of us hesitate to do our own thing? What advice would you have for
It's
listeners?
interesting, yeah, I do remember saying that to you. But then also on the flip side of saying I wish I'd done it sooner, I think it was because it's a relation to how old I am now or how young I am now. It's there is also a point of that if I'd started it sooner, I wouldn't have the work that I've done. So it's a bit of swings and roundabouts. I think people know when it's right. I think I think also I sort of fell into it. I think, my husband has a great design agency, and I'd sort of said, "Oh, I'm going to start Kate Dawkins Studio," and he said, "Well, I'll design your design your identity and do your website." And I think that's not the way to start a business, is by having a nice identity and a website and no business plan. But yeah, exactly. So I sort of started it overnight. But as I say, I do think it would have been nicer to have started it earlier, because I would have been younger and had that sort of energy and drive, but also I wouldn't probably have the clients or the kind of work I do. So there is a sort of yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think there's pros and cons to whenever you start, but people should know when it's right and go for it.
Wider picture, what's the biggest challenge within the live event industry at the moment?
There's two things in my mind that is coming quite exciting, and one is this sort of aspect of real-time content. So that's what at the moment we are doing, and other people aren't. All our work is obviously pre-rendered. It goes into a machine. It's not live. It's been made. Mm-hmm. The event is live. But now is the aspect of actually creating the content live as well. And I think there's something very exciting there. I think people are doing a lot of work around. I certainly noticed in Glastonbury a lot of work around taking the live feed of a performance and playing with it. Mm-hmm. What that gives you is obviously there's a budgetary thing, because obviously you're using software to affect what's coming out of a camera anyway. Yeah. So there's a very exciting aspect in that sense, and then of course moving into the sort of AR mixed reality, headsets, glasses, that kind of thing. Will they become part of the live experience and allow you to have your own personal live experience within it? We were saying with Fast and Furious, would we been able to, affect anything if all the audience had glasses? I mean,
that's the point. You mentioned earlier about the use of VR in live, and it's kind of something I was thinking about as well, because we've done some projects around live reveals in VR and time and place, and I just wondered what does it bring in that? Is live about being at a certain time and a certain physical environment?
This is exactly it.
If I'm sat at home and someone else is sat on the other side of the world but we're in the same space, is the experience we have as good as it can be?
See, I don't see that's the bit that's the bit I struggle with as I say, with the VR thing. As I say, amazing technology, but it's that I'm over here and you're over here kind of shut off sense that I'm not so keen on. As I say, the one thing that sort of it does excite me is the lenses where you and me are looking at each other, but there is something between us that we're both experiencing. And that really excites me because I'm seeing like real, but experiencing another level to real. But, going back to your question about does live, what is live? Is it just that we're at a live event at a time, or does everything have to be, live?
Yeah.
I mean, which makes it, very, very hit and miss.
I mean, I was looking at historically. I was looking at like the history of like what the top live events in history and what was going on there, and looking at this even when they launched the space race and all these kind of things. That people were connected through a lens of the television.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, even to a point. I mean, so many things are rehearsed, so therefore not perhaps live. But that sort of removal of. But is it a joint experience? Passchendaele, there was 8,000 people here, 1.5 million people watching through, as you say, a lens and sharing the experience, but through television. So I think there's so many places that live events can go. I think it's exciting times.
Exciting times indeed. If you were to change one preconception and change one thing in the creative industry, what would you change?
Oh no, that's a difficult question.
Good.
It's not often I'm lost for words. Do you know what? I don't know. I think there is. If I could change something in the creative world, I think it's. I think it's getting everybody to sort of understand. It's an education again. I think of clients. We have some great clients. But it is that whole understanding of that classic good, fast, cheap. It surprises me to this day that we are still having to sort of say that's fine, but, you can't, as I say, you can't have it all. And another one that we sort of face in our, creative point is this understanding of we have the sort of design and animation that makes up our side, and then we have to then partner with the hardware and software of the technology, and those four things have to sit together. And we often get things like, people getting very excited saying, oh, we've had this idea and we've made this set and we've got, we've bought, £2 million worth of projectors and, everything's ready to go. And but we've realised we need some content and, we've got X amount of money for the content. You sort of say, well, I'd just say take your projectors back because the two things don't align, and it's still, again, that's still happening. That sort of not realisation that these four things, or these two things, the content and the technology, have to sit side by side. They're partners. They're together. They're not separate entities.
We're always learning, I think. How do you learn and grow your knowledge and expertise?
I agree with you. I like to learn a new thing every day. I tell you what I did do last night. This is quite an aside, but I was typing out the dates of World War One, and so I was typing, September 1914, and I was going month by month. And I said to my husband last night, there's a sudden terrible realisation when you're typing out the months how long that war was, and just a realisation as you're doing something like that. But I mean, learning. I think to learn, you need to be open. You need to be intrigued. I'm very much a why. I keep asking why. I'm like a child, and just why, and so I think there's that sort of need to understand things. I think each of the projects. I love the fact that our projects are so varied, and the fact that I go into this sort of full research at the beginning of any project, so I like to sort of
it more than I like when I meet projects. I like to know it more than the client.
Yeah, me too, exactly. I'm like, I know everything about that. And we're not in a sort of know-all way, but just in an intrigued way. So I love learning, and I get frustrated, so I don't like to let not being able to do something get in my way. I always try and find a way of doing it, even if it's quite a hodgepodge way.
It's not no, it's just not now.
So I wouldn't do it that way. You can do it much easier. Yeah, but this is the only way I know to do it. So this is how I'm doing it. So, yeah.
And there's a nice soundbite to finish on, something I ask every guest. What's the biggest thing you know now that you wish you'd known when you started out? What advice would you give to your high school self? Kate Dawkins, age 15.
What advice would I give to myself?
In a sentence, what would you say?
Time. Yeah, I'm gonna have to. I think it's there. I think don't take yourself too seriously.
Wise words there. Thank you, Kate, and thank you to you too, the listener of the Healthy Creative podcast. I hope you enjoyed that one. We're always keen to hear your perspective on anything we've discussed. We'd like to hear in future episodes. If you're a new listener, please don't forget to subscribe and rate us on the iTunes 5-star rating system. We want to make more of these and get some more great guests on. Take it easy, everyone. I'm Aaron Daniels, and that was Kate Dawkins. Until next time on the Healthy Creative podcast.